They called my job useless paperwork. When bonus season arrived, my manager handed me exactly $0. He laughed in my face and said he owed nothing to someone typing up trash. What he did not realize was that my signature was the only thing keeping a $287 million project alive. When I finally walked out that door, I took his entire career down with me. Hello and welcome back to the Boss Revenge Stories channel, where we truly appreciate your continuous support. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to operate, which means we will soon have to stop publishing new videos here. If you enjoyed today's story, please support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel to listen to exclusive longer true stories, with even more detailed situations and multiple emotional voice actors that we cannot share on YouTube, which you can access by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the link in the video description or pinned comment. Now, let us dive right into today's story. From the perspective of our protagonist, Madison Knight. I am Madison Knight, 34 years old, and until recently, I was the environmental licensing specialist at Ethra Global Logistics, a massive transportation conglomerate based in Denver. If you asked anyone in the marketing or tech departments what I did, they would probably roll their eyes and mutter something about endless forms and gray filing cabinets. My job was to secure federal land and water permits. It is widely considered the most mind-numbingly boring job in the corporate world. A vast sea of regulatory compliance and government bureaucracy that puts most normal people to sleep. But here is the dark, comedic truth of corporate America that the shiny executives never seem to grasp. Those boring permits hold the absolute lifeblood of every single construction project. Without my signature and my specific government credentials, not a single shovel touches the dirt. Life at Ethra was stable, albeit suffocating in the way modern open-plan offices always are. The air always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and synthetic carpet, and the ambient noise was a steady hum of meaningless corporate jargon. Then came the arrival of Bryce Sterling. Bryce was 29, sporting the quintessential tech bro aesthetic directly imported from Silicon Valley, complete with a closet full of expensive neutral-toned puffer vests and a vocabulary built entirely on hollow buzzwords. He was brought in as the new director of project expansion. Within his very first week, he made it his personal mission to loudly declare his intention to disrupt bureaucratic barriers. He was obsessed with artificial intelligence, constantly lecturing everyone about streamlining workflows, optimization, and moving fast to break things. Unfortunately, the thing he wanted to break was my heavily regulated department. Bryce immediately began tearing through the established hierarchy like a toddler with a sledgehammer. He viewed the rigorous environmental vetting processes as archaic hurdles slowing down his grand, visionary expansion plans. To him, ecological compliance was just a minor bottleneck that a new language model algorithm could solve in 10 seconds. He started cutting corners on preliminary land surveys and deliberately excluded me from all strategic planning meetings. I would only find out about major developmental shifts when I saw the adjusted blueprints floating around the communal office printer. He was treating a highly regulated federal legal landscape like a beta software test, blind to the legal landmines scattered everywhere. Then came the crown jewel of Bryce's portfolio, a massive initiative known as Project Evergreen. It was a sprawling logistical hub planned for a highly sensitive ecological zone in Oregon, valued at an astonishing $287 million. The Oregon Department of Environmental Quality does not play games with corporate developers. The acquired land was surrounded by protected wetlands, meaning the legal barriers for ecological conservation were a nightmare of specific state and federal stipulations. I was the only person in the entire Denver office who actually understood the intricate web of compliance required to get this hub built. I knew the specific soil preservation mandates, the strict water runoff thresholds, and the exact government officials to contact. Bryce, however, saw my detailed warning memos as negative energy. He told me to stop being a roadblock and let his automated drafting software handle the initial site filings. I kept my head down, doing exactly what was asked of me while watching him steer a $287 million ship directly toward a legal iceberg. I figured my quiet dedication to keeping the company executives out of federal prison would at least be recognized when December rolled around. At Ethra, year-end bonuses were the only thing that made the soul-crushing corporate grind bearable. On the day the bonus structures were announced, I sat at my desk, sipping my lukewarm coffee, waiting for the notification. The email finally chimed in my inbox. I opened it, scanning past the generic corporate holiday greetings to find my specific compensation figure. My annual performance bonus was listed as exactly $0. I stared at the glowing screen. Not a reduced percentage, not a lower performance tier. $0. I stood up, smoothed out my skirt, and walked straight to Bryce's glass-walled office. I did not knock. I walked in and placed a printout of the email on his pristine, minimalist desk. I asked him politely to explain the obvious administrative error. Bryce did not even look embarrassed. He let out a condescending scoff, pushed himself away from his dual-curved monitors, and leaned back in his ergonomic mesh chair. He laced his fingers together, looking at me like I was a dinosaur refusing to go extinct. "There is no error, Madison," he said, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "I am reallocating the department budget toward our new AI compliance tools. We need forward thinkers, not paper pushers. Frankly, I have no obligation to pay a bonus to an employee who just clacks away at some scrap paper." He smiled, fully assuming that was the end of the conversation. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice, slam my hands on his sleek desk, or demand immediate justice from the Human Resources Department. The reaction Bryce was so desperately hoping for, a hysterical emotional outburst he could weaponize to justify his cruelty, never materialized. Instead, an absolute, crystalline silence settled over me. I simply looked at his smug, self-satisfied face, offered a curt, incredibly polite nod, and said, "Understood, Bryce. I will adjust my expectations accordingly." Then, I turned on my heel and walked back to my desk. In that brief walk down the gray-carpeted hallway, something fundamental and irreversible shifted inside my brain. The loyal, hard-working employee who cared about the future of this company died right there. A switch flipped, locking instantly into a mode of total, systematic destruction. There was no hot anger clouding my judgment, only a chilling, heavy calm. It was the detached serenity of a predator observing a very stupid prey wander into a trap. The very next morning, an official company memo circulated through the internal network. Bryce had officially restructured the department, effectively demoting me to the humiliating title of Data Entry Coordinator. He systematically stripped away all my clearance to interfere with his precious expansion plans, revoking my administrative access to the strategic project files. Yet, in a display of supreme arrogance, he kept me chained to my cubicle to handle the menial, tedious data uploads that his vaunted artificial intelligence software was simply too clumsy to process correctly. He genuinely thought he had neutralized the threat while keeping a convenient, cheap workhorse at his disposal. He was completely wrong. I embraced my new, downgraded role with a terrifying level of malicious compliance. I became a mindless machine, executing his exact orders to the letter, no matter how legally disastrous those orders were. Whenever he instructed me via the corporate messenger to bypass a mandatory preliminary soil assessment or ignore a local zoning ordinance to speed up his aggressive timeline, I did exactly as told. But simultaneously, I started building an impenetrable fortress of evidence. Every rushed directive, every ignored environmental compliance warning, every reckless email from his account was quietly exported, meticulously time-stamped, and saved onto a secure external drive tucked in my purse. I was no longer a participant in his department. I was a silent forensic auditor documenting a massive corporate crime scene before the murder even happened. Amidst his frantic, chaotic rush to break administrative boundaries, Bryce had completely overlooked a vital piece of the corporate architecture. He was so incredibly busy firing me from my strategic role that he never bothered to understand how the governmental systems actually functioned in the real world. Here was the deeply buried secret that would serve as my ultimate, devastating leverage. I was the sole legally registered proxy for Ethra Global Logistics on the highly secured official Oregon State Environmental Portal. My full legal name, my government identification number, and my specific biometric data were hard-coded into the Federal Registry as the exclusive guarantor for the acquired land. That meant absolutely nothing could move forward on his prized $287 million masterpiece without my encrypted digital signature. No land use rights, no water diversion permits, no heavy machinery clearing the ground. Unless I personally logged in and authorized the state renewals with my two-factor authentication, the entire construction site would be legally frozen in place, and Bryce, in his infinite tech bro wisdom, had just alienated and insulted the only human being holding the digital keys to his kingdom. With the trap now quietly and perfectly set, I began executing my exit strategy. During my strictly mandated 1-hour lunch breaks, I would retreat to the soundproof privacy phone booths down in the main lobby. There, under the harsh fluorescent lights, I conducted secret Zoom interviews. I pitched my decade of specialized regulatory expertise to a top-tier renewable energy corporation that actually valued strict legal compliance and rewarded competence. Within exactly 7 days of my $0 bonus announcement, I received a formal binding offer letter in my personal email. It came with a massive signing bonus, platinum-level health benefits, and a spectacular 40% salary increase. My escape hatch was now fully constructed and operational. All that remained was locking the door behind me and handing Bryce the detonator. I spent my final 48 hours drafting a transition handover report. It was a masterpiece of dry corporate documentation, extending to over 50 pages of exhaustive, mind-numbing detail within its dense, boring paragraphs, buried deep under standard operational procedures and software tutorials. I clearly listed the impending permit renewal deadlines for the Oregon State Portal. I outlined the exact dates the biometric signatures were legally required to prevent a federal shutdown. I attached the massive file and sent it directly to Bryce's inbox, flagged with high importance. I sat at my desk, sipping water, watching the read receipt software run in the background. Exactly 15 minutes later, the notification popped up on my screen. Bryce had opened the email. Exactly 5 seconds after that, the document was closed. He had skimmed the first introductory paragraph, deemed it more useless scrap paper from a bitter subordinate, and completely ignored the rest. He had the explicit warning right in his hands, and he chose to throw it away. The stage was now perfectly set for a catastrophic failure. Submitting my official resignation felt less like a dramatic, cinematic climax and much more like completing a thoroughly mundane, bureaucratic checklist. I executed my departure with a level of absolute precision that would have made any seasoned compliance officer weep with sheer joy. I drafted a flawless 2 weeks notice letter, explicitly stating my final date of employment, and submitted it precisely at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. I did not include a single word of complaint, no veiled threats, no passive-aggressive remarks, and absolutely zero emotional baggage. It was a perfectly sanitized, legally bulletproof document designed to slide through the corporate machinery without causing a single ripple. The Human Resources Department, remaining incredibly true to their nature as a soulless, automated entity, processed my exit with terrifying apathy. Within 24 hours, I received a rigidly formatted, automated reply thanking me for my years of service, complete with a generic digital attachment detailing the exact protocol for returning my company laptop and parking pass. In a highly functional corporate organization, an offboarding procedure for someone holding my specific regulatory position would have immediately triggered a massive internal security audit. A competent human resources representative would have scheduled a mandatory meeting in a sterile conference room to meticulously transfer over every single federal credential, state portal login, and encrypted government passcode. But Ethra Global Logistics was no longer a highly functional organization. It had devolved entirely into Bryce Sterling's personal, unregulated playground. because he had so proudly and so publicly scrubbed my name from the senior management directory and downgraded my access levels in the internal company network. The automated human resources software simply categorized me as a low-level clerical worker. The system automatically assumed I had no administrative power worth transferring or monitoring. Nobody reached out to ask me to surrender my state proxy status. Nobody in the entire building even knew that status existed anymore. Bryce had effectively blinded his own company to the massive legal liability quietly ticking away in the background. When my final Friday afternoon arrived, the office was suffocatingly quiet. There was no farewell sheet cake, no awkward goodbye speeches, and certainly no parting handshake from my visionary manager. I spent my last 60 minutes quietly packing up my mundane corporate existence into a single cardboard box. I tossed my dying potted cactus into the communal recycling bin, wiped down my dual monitors with a disinfectant wipe, and stacked my final expense reports in a neat, orderly pile. Right at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I placed my plastic employee identification badge squarely in the center of my meticulously cleared desk. I walked down the gray-carpeted hallway for the final time, pushed open the heavy glass doors of the main lobby, and stepped out into the crisp Denver air. A profound, overwhelming sense of physical relief washed over my entire body. I was finally free from the toxic environment. Yet, hidden deep within the highly secured servers of the Federal Environmental Agency, my name remained bathed in a glowing red light, standing as the solitary, irreplaceable lock on a multi-million-dollar developmental gateway. I did not transition straight to my new corporate role. Instead, I packed my car and drove straight to a secluded, rustic wooden cabin nestled deep in the mountainous wilderness of Montana. For 14 glorious days, I completely severed all ties with the chaotic, hyper-connected modern world. I had 0 bars of cell phone service, no corporate email notifications vibrating in my pocket, and absolutely no lingering stress. I spent my crisp mornings drinking hot black tea on a creaky wooden porch, listening to the wind rustle through the giant pine trees, completely detached from the impending corporate apocalypse I had left behind in Colorado. Meanwhile, back in the synthetic, air-conditioned nightmare of the Ethra offices, Bryce was incredibly busy patting himself on the back. From what my former colleagues later recounted to me, he actually had the absolute audacity to host a catered office lunch party to celebrate his successful departmental restructuring. He stood in the center of the corporate break room, eating expensive catered sushi, loudly boasting to the junior executives about how he had successfully trimmed the redundant fat and optimized the administrative workflow. He was completely intoxicated by his own perceived brilliance, raising a toast to his artificial intelligence software, blissfully unaware that the structural foundation beneath his expensive Italian leather shoes was already beginning to spectacularly collapse. The digital countdown began exactly as I had anticipated. Deep within the automated servers of the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, a highly sensitive programmed alert recognized a critical impending deadline. With exactly 7 days remaining until the catastrophic expiration of the provisional land use permits, the state system generated a final warning notification. It fired this urgent message into the digital void, aiming directly for my highly secure corporate email address. However, because my account had been unceremoniously deactivated by the Human Resources Department weeks prior, the message hit a dead end. Following the standard corporate hierarchy routing rules programmed into the company servers, the bounced email automatically redirected itself, landing squarely in the overflowing inbox of Bryce Sterling and his administrative assistant. When the assistant finally flagged the urgent government warning for Bryce, he did not see a flashing red siren of impending doom. He saw an annoying administrative roadblock. According to the office gossip I later acquired from a very talkative former colleague, Bryce merely rolled his eyes at the official state seal displaying on his screen. He was completely and utterly convinced this was just another piece of the useless scrap paper he had so proudly mocked me for handling. Instead of picking up the phone to consult the legal department or asking someone who actually understood federal compliance, He decided this was the perfect moment to demonstrate the supreme power of his new technological toys. He booted up the highly expensive artificial intelligence language model he had forced upon the entire division. He fed the complex, highly specific federal environmental prompt into the software, instructing it to instantly generate a comprehensive ecological impact report and a full renewal application. The software, lacking any actual geological data, certified environmental analysis, or historical context of the site, simply hallucinated. It fabricated a massive document filled with generalized corporate jargon, non-existent soil metrics, and entirely fictionalized water runoff assessments. It was a masterpiece of absolute garbage, a hollow shell of buzzwords mimicking a legal document. And then, Bryce committed his fatal, career-ending mistake. He confidently attached his own digital signature to the bottom of the unverified, fabricated document and uploaded it directly into the state government portal. The federal verification software does not care about corporate synergy, optimized workflows, or disruptive innovation. It cares about precise, encrypted legal authorization. The exact millisecond Bryce hit the submit button, the state portal algorithm scanned the incoming document. It cross-referenced his digital signature against the heavily guarded federal registry. The system instantly realized that Bryce Sterling was not the legally mandated guarantor. He was not me. In the unyielding eyes of the government, an unauthorized individual had just attempted to submit a falsified environmental document using unverified data to secure federal land rights. The automated system did not just reject the application, it instantly threw a massive red flag, immediately categorizing the submission as a severe instance of suspected government document fraud. The fallout was not limited to digital warnings. It manifested in the real world with terrifying, relentless speed. Out in the damp, muddy wilderness of Oregon, the massive construction site was bustling with chaotic activity. Giant excavators, massive bulldozers, and heavy lifting cranes were preparing to break ground on the newly acquired land. Suddenly, a massive fleet of white vehicles belonging to the state environmental police roared onto the site, their emergency lights flashing brightly against the overcast sky. Heavily armed federal marshals and serious state inspectors stepped out of the vehicles, immediately ordering every single construction worker to cut the engines and step away from their equipment. They strung up thick yellow caution tape across all the main entrances, physically barricading the entire area. Millions of dollars worth of heavy machinery were instantly reduced to giant, useless paperweights sinking slowly into the mud. The panicked site manager was handed a formal written order, explicitly stating that all construction was permanently halted pending a full criminal fraud inquiry. Back in Denver, the frantic phone call from the site manager hit Bryce like a runaway freight train. The color completely drained from his smug face as the horrifying reality of his monumental error began to set in. But his massive ego simply would not allow him to admit catastrophic failure. When the senior executives started asking uncomfortable questions about why the daily progress reports from the Oregon site had suddenly gone completely dark, Bryce scrambled to construct a flimsy wall of lies. He assured the wealthy board of directors that the sudden delay was nothing more than a minor software glitch involving the new automated systems. He flashed a nervous, sweaty smile across the boardroom table and confidently promised them he would have the entire situation completely resolved within 24 hours. He was desperately trying to bail water out of a rapidly sinking ship using a tiny paper cup. Meanwhile, over 1,000 miles away, I was happily settling into my gorgeous new executive corner office. The bright natural light poured in through the giant floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating my pristine mahogany desk. I took a slow, luxurious sip of my expensive artisanal coffee, thoroughly enjoying the profound peace of an actually competent workplace that valued my expertise. Out of pure, unadulterated curiosity, I opened a private browser tab on my new laptop and navigated directly to the public registry of the Oregon State Environmental Portal. I carefully typed in the specific project identification code for Project Evergreen, A slow, genuinely warm smile spread across my face as I watched the official status of his highly prized $287 million masterpiece update in real time. It shifted from active development to a bold, glaring red font that read, "Suspended Criminal Investigation." The illusion of total control inside the Denver headquarters shattered precisely at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. The shiny, automated glass doors of the Ethra lobby slid open, but instead of the usual parade of overpaid consultants carrying expensive lattes, two stern men in dark, unbranded windbreakers strode up to the main reception desk. They were federal inspectors from the Environmental Protection Agency, and they carried a thick leather folder that radiated absolute doom. They flashed their shiny golden badges at the terrified young receptionist and demanded, in voices that offered absolutely zero room for negotiation, to speak immediately with the sole registered proxy for Project Evergreen. They explicitly demanded to see me, the receptionist, staring blindly at her highly optimized digital directory, began to stammer uncontrollably. She frantically typed into her system, her eyes widening in sheer panic as she realized that the person the federal government was actively hunting for had been completely scrubbed from the active employee roster weeks ago. Word of the federal incursion spread through the open plan office faster than a catastrophic fire. Within 5 minutes, the chief financial officer and the chief legal officer were sprinting out of the executive suites, their faces completely drained of all color. They intercepted the aggressive inspectors and quickly ushered them into the largest, most transparent glass conference room right in the center of the floor. The entire company stopped working. Hundreds of employees pressed themselves against the glass walls of their cubicles, watching the silent, terrifying pantomime unfold. The chief legal officer, a man who usually commanded the room with ruthless efficiency, looked physically sick as he read the cover page of the massive federal document, realizing they were staring down the barrel of a monumental legal catastrophe. The executives immediately dispatched a heavily armed security guard to march Bryce Sterling from his corner office directly into the glass interrogation chamber. Bryce looked exactly like a man walking straight to his own execution. The smug swagger was entirely gone, replaced by a pale, sweating, trembling mess of a human being. The lead federal inspector did not mince his words. He slammed his hands onto the polished mahogany table and delivered a legal reality check that completely destroyed Bryce's entire corporate existence. The inspector loudly announced, ensuring his booming voice carried through the slight gap in the heavy glass door, that the fraudulent submission of automated ecological data using a falsified digital identity was not a simple administrative oversight. It was a severe federal felony. He explicitly stated that forging a secure government signature to bypass ecological conservation laws was an act of deliberate criminal fraud. As a direct result, the entire $287 million land transaction was officially and aggressively frozen. It was indefinitely locked in a strict legal purgatory until a federal judge could unravel the monumental mess. The state was not just stopping construction, they were effectively seizing control of the asset. The chief financial officer grabbed his own chest, gasping for air, looking like he was about to suffer a massive cardiac event right there on the expensive corporate carpet. The sheer pressure inside that glass room finally broke Bryce. He mumbled a desperate excuse about needing to use the restroom, practically sprinting out of the conference room while clutching his stomach. He locked himself inside the handicap stall of the executive bathroom, sinking to his knees on the cold tile floor. I know exactly what he did next, because I still have the digital receipts securely saved. He pulled out his phone with trembling, sweaty hands and began frantically dialing my personal cell phone number. The arrogant visionary who once told me he owed me absolutely nothing was now reduced to a whimpering, hyperventilating child. Over the course of 15 long minutes, he left 7 incredibly lengthy, entirely pathetic voicemails. "Madison, please, you have to pick up the phone." His voice cracked with wet, desperate tears on the first recording. "I made a huge mistake. Please just give me the password. I will wire you $50,000 right now out of my own account. I will give you your job back with a massive raise. Please, They are going to put me in prison. He completely failed to understand that I was holding all the cards and he was drowning in a deep ocean of his own hubris. I did not answer a single one of his frantic phone calls. I sat in my comfortable new chair, sipping my coffee, and let every single desperate ring echo into the void, allowing the silence to slowly crush his remaining sanity. Instead of responding to his pathetic pleas, I placed a very calm, calculated phone call to my newly retained corporate defense attorney. Within exactly 30 minutes of Bryce's final tearful voicemail, the legal department at Aethra received a massive, beautifully formatted electronic document package. It was a formal cease and desist order, commanding Bryce Sterling and all Aethra representatives to completely halt their relentless harassment of a private citizen. Attached to this aggressive legal warning was the flawless, 50-page handover report I had sent Bryce on my final day. My lawyer highlighted the exact digital timestamp proving Bryce had opened the document, purposefully ignored the federal warnings explicitly detailed inside, and deliberately chose to proceed with his fraudulent artificial intelligence scheme. The document proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I possessed absolutely zero remaining legal obligations to Aethra Global Logistics. The walls were now entirely closing in on the transportation conglomerate. You cannot keep a multi-million-dollar federal raid a secret for very long, especially when you have an office full of terrified employees armed with modern smartphones. By early afternoon, an anonymous source leaked the juicy details of the suspended mega project to a prominent financial news outlet. The headline was absolutely brutal, detailing how an incompetent tech executive had effectively destroyed a $287 million expansion through criminal negligence and gross stupidity. The reaction on Wall Street was immediate and merciless. Institutional investors panicked before the closing bell could even ring. The publicly traded stock price of Aethra Global Logistics began to violently plummet, wiping out hundreds of millions of dollars in market capitalization in a matter of a few short hours. The fragile illusion of Bryce's brilliant corporate optimization was completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but a smoking, catastrophic crater of a ruined career. The absolute severity of the situation finally forced the chief executive officer of Aethra Global Logistics to cut his luxurious European vacation short. He chartered an emergency private jet, flying overnight from the southern coast of France directly back to the Denver headquarters. By early Wednesday morning, a mandatory, ultra-high security board of directors meeting was convened in the top-floor penthouse boardroom. The atmosphere inside that expansive room was incredibly toxic, smelling faintly of stale sweat, cold dread, and impending corporate doom. Bryce Sterling was summoned to stand at the end of the massive mahogany table, facing a firing squad of furious billionaires and panicked senior partners, desperate to save his own skin. Bryce immediately resorted to his favorite tactic. He lied. He pointed his trembling finger wildly, attempting to shift the entire blame onto me. He loudly proclaimed that I was a bitter, disgruntled former employee who had intentionally set a malicious trap for him before my departure. He swore to the board that I had deliberately withheld critical state passwords to sabotage his visionary expansion plans. His pathetic defense did not even last 5 minutes. The chief legal officer, a man who had not slept in 3 days and was radiating pure, unadulterated rage, stood up from his leather chair. He slammed a heavy stack of papers onto the table. It was the physical printout of the comprehensive handover report I had sent Bryce on my final day. But the lawyer did not just bring the report. He brought the encrypted internal server logs provided by the Information Technology Department. The lawyer looked Bryce dead in the eye and read the unarguable digital truth out loud for the entire board to hear. The logs explicitly proved that Bryce had received the critical warning email on a Tuesday morning. He had opened the document containing the exact legal instructions and the impending state deadlines. He kept the document open for exactly 5 seconds before closing it and permanently deleting the email from his active inbox. Bryce's grand illusion of being a victim completely crumbled into dust. He had been handed the manual to defuse the bomb, and he had arrogantly thrown it in the trash. Right at the peak of this intense boardroom confrontation, the ultimate, devastating twist arrived. An executive assistant nervously entered the room, carrying a heavily sealed government envelope delivered by an armed federal courier. The chief executive officer tore open the thick paper and read the final, unappealable decree from the Oregon State Environmental Coalition. Because Bryce had not merely missed a deadline, but had actively utilized automated artificial intelligence to fabricate sensitive ecological metrics and forge a federal digital signature. The state had taken the absolute nuclear option. The decree formally announced that Ethra Global Logistics was permanently and forever stripped of its rights to purchase or develop that specific parcel of land. The state of Oregon was fully seizing control of the territory for federal conservation. Furthermore, the state levied a catastrophic, immediate punitive fine of $50 million against the corporation for attempting to defraud a government system. The entire $287 million project did not just stall, it completely evaporated into thin air, entirely unsalvageable. The chief executive officer slammed the federal decree onto the table, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He did not ask for Bryce to resign. He fired him instantly on the spot. The official termination reason recorded by Human Resources was gross criminal negligence and the deliberate destruction of high-value company property. Two large, extremely stoic corporate security guards were immediately summoned into the boardroom. They marched up to Bryce, physically unclipped his access badge from his expensive designer vest, and ordered him to empty his pockets. Bryce was weeping openly, completely humiliated, as he was escorted out of the glass boardroom, down the main elevator, and paraded straight through the crowded lobby. Hundreds of silent employees watched the arrogant tech visionary get tossed out onto the cold concrete sidewalk like yesterday's garbage. His entire professional career in the corporate world was permanently annihilated. Later that same afternoon, clearly acting out of absolute desperation, the chief executive officer swallowed his massive pride and attempted to call my personal phone number. He left a highly apologetic voicemail, practically begging me to return. He officially offered me a guaranteed consulting retainer of $250,000, a dedicated support staff, and a senior vice president title, just to see if I could somehow negotiate with the angry state officials and untangle the monumental disaster Bryce had left behind. I never even had to speak to him. My new, highly professional administrative assistant intercepted the follow-up calls. She politely but firmly informed the chief executive officer that my schedule at the new firm was entirely booked and that I would be permanently declining his generous offer to clean up their mess. I sat comfortably in the corner office of my new corporate headquarters, watching the beautiful afternoon sun sink below the skyline. I took a sip of my sparkling water and opened my personal banking application on my phone. A bright green notification popped up, confirming that a massive six-figure sign-on bonus had just successfully cleared and deposited directly into my checking account. I smiled, feeling a profound, absolute sense of victory. I gently closed my laptop for the day, packed my designer bag, and whispered a quiet final thought to the empty room. You were right, Bryce. You did not have to pay me a bonus for handling scrap paper, but the state government certainly did. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this incredible journey with us today. We would absolutely love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please let us know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story satisfying and want to help us keep bringing you these amazing tales, please consider supporting us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel. You will get immediate access to the absolute best, most exclusive true stories that are fully dramatized and simply too intense to publish on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code right here on your screen, or by clicking the direct link we have provided in the video description and pinned comment below. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you in the next story.